We don't live in the world of reality. We live in the world of how we perceive reality. Brian Singer. You can't just wish change. You have to live the change in order for it to become a reality. Steve Maraboli. Reality exists in the human mind, and nowhere else. George Orwell. Greetings, one and all, wherever you happen to be on planet Earth. I'm Michael, and this is Michael's Lens on Life. For our third podcast on Michael's Lens on Life, we're going to be looking at what constitutes our sense of reality. That is, what seems to be objectively real in our worldview, and how that may not be a true representation of what reality really is. It sounds a bit weird and complex and a bit like what's on the other side of Alice's looking glass. Well, it turns out that what our common sense tells us is real, like a bottle of water, a cooking utensil, a car, a hamburger, a tree, or a flower, is essentially based on everything that is seen, felt, tasted, heard, and smelled. In other words, what we register as objective reality is whatever has first been passed through the filters of our senses and is then being mixed cognitively in the sausage maker of our memory. That process qualifies for most of us as objective reality, the real stuff of our everyday experience, the things felt and qualified through our five senses, and of course those things we have been taught are real. But is that it? Is that all there is? Is that reality? Really? Or are the senses simply painting a continuous collective neurological mind picture, moment to moment, for our consciousness to interpret? Sort of a movie produced by a batch filter in the brain. What is actually being conjured up when we say reality? In this Part 1 episode about reality, I'll be starting this journey with a brief history of what I came to believe was reality back in the day, and a personal bag of my own memories of what I was taught was real, starting with impressions I had during my pre-adolescent childhood, back in the day when I attended Our Lady of Good Counsel Parochial School. Now, as we begin this virtual trip, I want you to find, honestly, where the point was in your own life when you began to ask yourself, what is real? Really? At this point in your life, are you still asking yourself that question? I know I am, and I'm also going to guess that your first unsophisticated questions and views occurred when you were quite young. This trip over the course of your many life encounters and events is bound to have shifted your belief systems along the way. Same for me, and the trip isn't over yet. So, to paraphrase the great actress Bette Davis, fasten your reality seatbelt. It's going to be a bumpy ride. Now, before continuing, let me bring to your attention the links in the description box below. These views represent some of the current theoretical models regarding the concept of reality. I am not suggesting to you that they are the only representations of reality theory, but after 76 years, and probably 55 years of that, thinking about this subject, two of the links fit comfortably into my own view of what defines reality. The first link is a podcast interview entitled The Argument Against Reality, featuring Dr. Donald Hoffman. Professor Hoffman is a cognitive scientist, and in this interview he takes a deep dive into the physics and physiology of reality. He has been investigating the mysteries of consciousness, awareness, and reality for more than 30 years. Our second podcast interview link is entitled The Mental Nature of Reality, featuring Dr. Bernardo Kastrup. Professor Kastrup is a leading researcher in the field of artificial intelligence, and is a much-published philosopher of science with books dealing with consciousness, awareness, and reality. Finally, our third link is a video presentation that I included here because I talk about it in the podcast. It's entitled, What Really Happened at the Council of Nicaea? Now, while it does not represent reality theory, it will give you a factual sense of how the Western Christian Church came to be organized in the manner that it was, and how it hugely impacted our concept of reality for many, many centuries, right up to the present. Okay, the question seems simple and direct enough. What is real? What is reality? Yet an accurate definition and scientific grasp of the term has been sought after for millennia. For the majority of the time, there have been modern humans, about the last 40,000 years of a 3 million year evolutionary path. We have considered ourselves to be sentient and highly intelligent and the apex form of life on this planet. Humans are at the top of the knowledge and technical food chain, but it did not happen overnight. At some point along the front of that evolutionary path of 40 millennia, an individual of our species looked up and, with probable wonderment, awe, and curiosity, saw the small lights in the heavens and began to think and question what those lights were and who or what put them there. Then, for a period of time longer than the past 2 millennia, the scientific scholars of the time, primarily Greek, Roman, and Arabic scientists, established a multitude of gods and earth, wind, fire, and water as the creators and manipulators of the growing principles of life and all material and spiritual reality. Those small lights in the night sky, the field of stars we are all familiar with today, were placed there, according to the ancient scholars, for a variety of reasons by the gods or elemental forces. And for a very long time to follow, that reasoning was going to be the foundation of what was thought to be and taught as the substance of reality. The gods were real, and their whims were our common reality. Then, about 1600 years ago, there is an event that took place which changed everything. This event would influence the belief systems in Western civilizations right up to today. For 300+ years after the alleged death of a man called Christ, a new religious philosophy called Christianity had been surviving persecution and gaining an acceptance as a new way to think about spiritual matters and physical reality. This event is one of those snapshots that helps to explain how billions of people, including me, have been influenced in their perception of reality. The First Council of Nicaea was convened in 325 A.D. There was a second council that convened in 787 A.D., but it is the first council that I'm focused on here. It was a gathering of invited members of the Christian Church hierarchy, called by the Roman Emperor Constantine, who would himself become a convert to the Christian faith on his deathbed. Constantine had already deemed that the new Christian Church would be the official religion of Rome. He ordered the church hierarchy to meet at Nicaea, Greece in 325 A.D. to examine, debate, and choose the written documents and doctrines that would create the future canon of the Christian Roman Catholic Church. The belief in Christ as the founding element of a new spiritual belief system was well established by the 3rd century, but it was also comprised of many different segments that varied widely in their beliefs and practices. Some of these elements believed, for instance, that Christ was an enlightened spiritual leader, but entirely human. Others believed that capital H, He, was an actual physical representation of the one true God come to earth in human form, and so on and so forth. It was a time of great confusion and discontent, So the emperor decided enough was enough and gathered a representation of the church leaders together to meet and decide, once and for all, what would be the elements of the true faith to be followed by all Christians, and what would be the heretical beliefs and writings that would be abandoned. It was, philosophically speaking, a watershed moment in human history. For the first time, a small group of men would decide not only what elements defined being a Christian meant, but would also define the substance of what was objectively real and what was not real for the entire human race. In short form, the Council of Nicaea would tell humans how to think for the next 1,600 years. So, for the next several centuries, until the period of the Reformation, and thereafter, the Roman Catholic Church was what defined reality in Western civilization. Sin was objectively real. The Holy Trinity was objectively real. The sacraments were objectively real. Heaven and hell were objectively real. The virgin birth was objectively real. You get the picture. When the Protestant factions moved away from the singular influence of Rome and broke with the rule of the papal dynasty, it did not change the way people viewed reality as taught by Western organized religion. The proclamations of Nicaea held true for all. Heaven, hell, spiritual judgment, sin, angels, saints, martyrs, exorcism, etc., etc., were considered objectively really real, and they have been and remain the stock and trade of Christianity for the past 1,600 years. Regardless of any particular religious group across the spectrum of Christianity, a given Christian had to walk a narrow path as defined by absolutely human theological architects who created and designed the metaphysical control mechanisms, whether one was Catholic, Lutheran, Episcopalian, and so on. As a result of those rules, conversion rates soared, and the flock grew worldwide, and Christian religious faith, though in many forms, flourished. Anyone who joined the Jesus Club was, by hook or by crook, given the opportunity of life ever after in the eternal presence of God the Almighty, if, of course, one survived the rules. I should also note here that many of the same ideas, tweaked by cultural considerations, exist in virtually all other organized religious faiths. In a nutshell, the world believed then, and for the most part by sheer numbers, believes now, in the reality of religious magic and mythology as the foundations for an understanding and belief in objective reality that continues to this day. All of it being bound together with continuing belief and faith in the truth of a human-created system of magic, folk tales, and the promise of redemption and eternal life in the presence of God. Of some interest, I think, is the notion that the effort to consolidate and unify the Christian faith at Nicaea essentially collapsed at the start of the Reformation period and beyond, when various new segments of the Christian faith arose and challenged many of the precepts of the one Roman Church as defined by the Council of Nicaea. The Reformation began the process of untying that intellectual knot so that there would be religious freedom and separation from the Church in Rome. But it would also influence the rise of skeptical thinking about the world we live in, and the truth-seeking that would be created over several centuries in a new system of organized thinking and research that relied on observations and data from verified or falsified experimentation that would become what is now known as the scientific method. So that is a very short summation of what pre-science humanity was led to believe was the substance of what was really real, as defined for a long time by the Christian faith. We jump now to my pre-adolescent youth in the mid-1950s, where I am having the first bout of my Christian faith challenged by internal questions of who, what, why, where, and when, the essential elements of good journalism. I was born on September 1st, 1945, in Kansas City, Missouri. My father had been raised in a small family group in Ohio who were part of the Lutheran Church, but not participating members. My mother's side of the family were a rather large multi-generational group who were of primarily Irish ancestry and very devout Roman Catholic. My journey of discovery to open thinking and freedom from the controls of religious mythology began for me at about 9 or 10 years of age when I was attending Our Lady of Good Counsel parochial school. Of course, I didn't begin consideration of a different intellectual path in complex terms at that age. Rather, I began to form questions that would eventually lead me to dare express an enlightened rejection of religious mythology and begin to pay more attention to the path of skepticism and scientific truth and investigation. Our Lady of Good Counsel Parish Church consisted of the church building, with a classical facade built in the early 1900s. Sitting directly adjacent to the church was the rectory house of the same architectural design where the priests lived, and next to that was the convent where the nuns lived when not teaching at the school, located directly behind the church and rectory, and separated by a small parking lot that served as one of the playground areas during the week, was the school. It was an architecturally uncreative, red-bricked, multi-level square box of a building that housed several grades of elementary ruffians and pre-adolescent saints who were taught the Catholic Catechism, the foundation document of the Roman Catholic faith, and the usual academic subjects of geography, arithmetic, history, English, and composition. It was also back in the day of parental belief of let the nuns administer the discipline and punishment as they saw fit, frequently of a physical nature, and I can personally attest that they proudly invented new applications of disciplinary fervor with rulers and map pointers, all in the name of God, Jesus, and redemption. Once a month, we, the student body, would attend a special Mass and receive communion. It was a requirement and considered to be an important part of the school curriculum and religious orientation to the Catholic faith. On the day before that Mass, we would be led in groups from the school to the church to attend confession, a process when we, as pre-adolescent up-and-coming sinners, would be tasked to reveal our sins of action and thoughts in a closed confessional, whereupon we would receive forgiveness and blessing from the priest and prepare our spiritual selves to receive the Holy Communion sacrament the next day at Mass. After the Mass, the student body would then adjourn to the church basement for a donut and hot chocolate before returning to the school building for the day's lessons. It was on one of these post-Mass hot chocolate mornings that I was struck with a series of thoughts that upended my life for the next 50 years. I have likened the moment to what happened to St. Paul on his way to Damascus to collect taxes and persecute some Christians, which was becoming the New Testament version of Monday Night Football. Okay, it might not have been quite as dramatic a moment as that, and I certainly did not see visions of angels surrounding Jesus on puffy white clouds. But as I was returning to the school building after my donut, I had a rush of thoughts. Why was it necessary to go to church to receive a small wafer of pressed flour that made me a more pure person? Why were so many in our school sinners that needed to be forgiven? Why were we being told the saints, angels, and the Holy Family, meaning Mary, Joseph, baby Jesus, grown-up Jesus, and yes, the man himself, God the Father, watching us during that morning ritual, instead of stopping crime, war, and the ever-present 1950s communist scare, and the threat of rock and roll. It was a mind-boggling experience to my 10-year-old psyche, and the thoughts thereafter just wouldn't stop. From that specific day forward, and for the next 50 years, I would be assaulted by increasingly sophisticated internal arguments, doubts, and yes, even fears, about the path I found myself on, and the singular question that surrounded all of it: what was really real? It seemed to me over time that the Christian faith I had been intellectually saturated with was, to put it bluntly, false. A pack of lies constructed from whole cloth, fairy tales, and mythology. A clever system of psychological controls that kept people on their intellectual knees, praying and shelling out the coin. But if that was the case, at least for me, then what could replace that mythology with truth? What was real? One day, when I was 13, I was perusing books in the local library branch about philosophy, a discipline that I had become attracted to because of its ethical pursuit of truth in thinking. Mind you, that doesn't mean I understood at that time much of what I was reading. I didn't, and that would come much later. But the pursuit of facts, the actual historical data, and the pure and logical thinking and expression of science, for some reason, was soothing to me at that point in my life. I came across a volume by the philosopher and educator Mortimer J. Adler, titled How to Think About God, a Guide for the 20th Century Pagan. It's still available, and a short 175 pages in hardcover. I checked it out, and over the course of the next 2 weeks, I must have consumed it a half a dozen times. It was an astounding moment in my personal growth. Apparently, here was a man who wasn't preaching how to think about God with a 15-inch ruler. It was okay to travel the different highway. Along with diving into Adler's tome, my parents allowed me to purchase a couple of paperback books. One of them was by physicist John Archibald Wheeler, the leading father of black hole research, and one was by George Gamow, the astronomer who was supporting the steady-state universe theory. As it turned out, Wheeler was on the right theoretical path, and Gamow was not. But the ideas that were expressed by those authors in their and other similar books changed my mid-teen life. It was, after all, it seemed to me, okay to think. For the next several decades, I would read many, many books that popularized physics, astronomy, philosophy, archaeology, history, and classic literature. Without realizing it, I was smack dab in the middle of what Adler championed as the liberal arts approach to education. I was becoming self-taught and inspired to find the door to truth, although I must admit that I make more and more use of digital book reading platforms as my eyesight deteriorates with age. Murray Gell-Mann, Steven Weinberg, Ayn Rand, Hermann Hesse, and popular books by science fiction and horror novelists such as Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov, Philip K. Dick, and H.P. Lovecraft were added to the growing list of authors who were influencing and changing my internal universe and views of the world. I now had a growing perception of a dualist reality, a sense that brain and consciousness were somehow not one and the same. It was both fascinating and frightening. It was fascinating because it represented new, open-ended thinking, and it was frightening because it ripped apart any notion I had been taught about the realities of life and life after death. There was also a growing awareness that what we experience through our 5 senses is not necessarily what is objectively real. Now, I could not quite make sense of it at the time, but the term reality was taking on a decidedly different shape. As these ideas took root, it was becoming more apparent that a path through the faith and belief system of a Christian life was not what I sought. It was not that the virtues of mercy, charity, morality, civic responsibility, and tradition that are espoused by many religious faiths are wrong or mush-headed thinking. Indeed, those concepts are hugely important for our future survival as the human species. However, what I began to realize and believe to this day is that all of those virtues and positive concepts can be achieved without the baggage of religious mandates, doctrines, and dogma. But that's a story for another day. Moving forward, the next several decades found me seeking an increasingly deeper understanding of the concept of reality and consciousness from the stages of physics, cognitive theories, and philosophic science writings. Now, let me leave you with an interesting idea. There is a theory of reality that says everything is now, in the moment. History, in any detail you think you remember, and all your memories, and everything you think you have ever experienced and have been taught, only exists in the now. In other words, there is only this moment, and everything you remember and the filtered content of your senses exist only in this moment. What a great notion for the Twilight Zone. We'll begin to explore some of the current ideas of reality and consciousness in Part 2 of Reality Really? Please be sure and check out the links below for more in-depth discussions on reality. And please leave a comment about this session and subscribe to our podcast so you won't miss out on notification for the next Michael's Lens on Life. So, until our next visit, from me to you, adios, and be well and safe.